Hey, so hopefully y'all can hear me. Gonna be reading another chapter of Assata Shakur, an autobiography. So we're on chapter 15. Usually I can get like 2 or 3 chapters in, but we'll see. I just want to remind people that these spaces are made so that it can make radical material like more accessible. So it serves like an audiobook purpose. So there's captions if you click on the 3 dots so people can have even more access to the material, but it helps you to listen along. Just a reminder for those listening. So, like always, I'm going to just jump right in it. So, chapter 15. I, a bundle of energy walked into the Black Panther Party office on 7th Avenue. If a light had been plugged into me, I'm sure I would have lit up half of Harlem. I was fired up and raring to go. When I joined the BPP, I was determined to give it everything I had. The officer of the day gave me a form to fill out. He couldn't find the second sheet, so I went back with him to look for it. He was searching through a file cabinet which was in a state of anti-order. It was a complete mess. I offered to arrange it for him, and the brother consented. In a minute, I was knee-deep in paper, indexing, and putting everything in alphabetical order. After everybody's security files were filed, I cut index markers out of a vanilla folder, thinking about how low or how lax security was. I had just walked in off the street and they let me go through all their files. I explained the new system to the brother, happy at least that the experience gained from all those boring office jobs was putting to some revolutionary use. The same evening, I was on the bus to Philadelphia. The party had called for a constitutional convention to write a new constitution that would guarantee the rights of the poor and oppressed and would be anti racist and anti fascist. We were attending the plenary session for the convention to be held later in DC. This session was a definitive or a definite up. Everybody's spirits were soaring. It took my breath away to see all those revolutionaries get up and tell it like it was. I was so happy as a dog in Boneville. My hotel room was a pool table in the basement of a church. I slept better than a princess on 20 mattresses. When I got back to New York, I was assigned to the medical cadre. Joan Bird was my immediate supervisor. She had been a nursing student and was one of the defendants in the New York Panther 21 case. She was out on a $100,000 bail and busy working on the trial. She had been beaten, tortured, and hung upside down out of the police station window. She had big, soft eyes, nervous lips, and the face of someone who had been forced to grow up too soon. She reminded me of someone who had led a very sheltered life and then all of a sudden found herself in the cold, cruel world. She was sort of shy, and I felt sorry for her because she seemed to be under so much pressure. She took everything to heart. Nothing seemed to slide off her back. She worried about everything and everyone. She was facing 30 years in prison, so I had to do most of the medical cadre work, and she worried herself sick about that. The medical cadre was responsible for the health care of the Panthers. We made medical and dental appointments for them and taught them basic first aid so that they could help the people in emergencies. Periodically, we set up a table on the street corner and gave free TB tests or gave out information on sickle cell anemia. It was also my job to work with the black medical students and doctors who we were counting on to help us set up a free clinic in Harlem. The Panther Party had bought a brownstone on 127th Street, and as soon as it was renovated, we planned to open a free clinic there. Every week, all the medical cadre members from the Bronx, Brooklyn, Harlem, Jamaica, and Corona branches met at the Bronx Ministry of Information. On my first trip to the ministry, I carried a big stack of Panther newspapers. I was a lousy paper seller, and most of the time, I do got some of my doing good friends to chip in and buy them. Then We give them away to the people. The head of the medical cadre was Alawa. I know I butchered that name and I apologize. From the first moment, she gained my respect and admiration. She was serious about everything that concerned Black people, but when it came to their health, she was a fanatic. She demanded that we take our jobs seriously, and woe be to the medical cadre who showed up at the weekly meeting with nothing on their progress reports. Alewa, I think, had a young daughter, but she nevertheless did the work of two people. I got expelled from the party, though that first night after the medical cadre meeting. When I came out of the meeting, my stack of Panther papers was gone. I asked around, but no one had seen them. Finally, Robert Bay, the head of the whole East Coast branch of the party, said that he had seen them. Where are they? I asked. I threw them away. What do you mean you threw them away? I asked, thinking it was some kind of joke. I threw them away, he insisted. Y'all know that you're not supposed to leave the papers out here on the desk. This will teach you to put the papers up on the rack where they belong. I explained that it was my first time coming up to the ministry and that I had no way of knowing the procedure. You should have asked, he replied arrogantly. I threw them away, and that's that. I was losing my patience. Look, man, why don't you just give me my papers so that I can get out of here? I don't have time to stand here all night. I told you I threw the papers away, and that's that. Then you're either a liar or a fool, I shot back. He had made me mad, gone and stepped on my last nerve. Then he tried to get all bad, getting all in my face, trying to defend his stupid arrogance. I was in no mood for fooling around. I cursed him out royally and walked out of the office. The next day, when I walked into the Harlem office, Bashir, the officer of the day, told me I would have to leave. What do you mean leave? I asked. He said that he was sorry, but Robert Bay had called and told him that I was no longer in the party. I was burnt. I got the Bronx ministry and told them to put Bay on the phone and proceeded to call him the unprincipled, arrogant idiot he was. In addition to being cowardly, he hadn't even told me to my face that I was expelled. I was so warm I wasn't even surprised when he apologized and told me I was reinstated. I hate arrogance, whether it's white or purple or black. Some people let power go to their heads. They think that just because they have some kind of title in front of their name, you're supposed to bend over and kiss them on the ass. The only great people I have met have been modest and humble. You can't claim that you love people when you don't respect them, and you can't call for political unity unless you practice it in your relationships. And that doesn't happen out of nowhere. That's something that has got to be put into practice every day. The first day I was assigned to the breakfast program, I overslept. To get there on time, I had to get up at 4:30 in the morning. I was the picture of shame and remorse as I came plodding into the office. Fancy meeting you here, the sister who I was supposed to be helping said. So nice of you to come. Later on that evening, I criticized myself for being late. That's all right, sister, the brother who was leading the meeting said. You can do penance by working on the breakfast program for life. For life? I repeated. Yep. You can show your sincerity to the hungry children of Harlem by working on the breakfast for as long as you're in the party. I've always hated to get up in the morning, and the sheer idea of getting up every day at 4:30 made me groan. But I thought about the children I had let down. Getting up early should be an easy thing for a revolutionary. I thought about those who had given their lives for our struggle and decided it wasn't so hard after all. Later, one of the sisters told me, don't worry, they'll just assign you to the breakfast program every day until you're used to it, and they can count on you to be disciplined. The same thing happened to me. I was glad it had happened to others because I felt like such a dumbbell. I gotta try harder, I told myself. Working on the breakfast program turned out to be an absolute delight. The work was so fulfilling. The Harlem branch had breakfast programs in 3 different churches, and I rotated among all 3. From the first day I saw those kids, my heart went out to them. They were such bright, open little people, each with his or her own personality. I spent the first 2 weeks or so just getting my cooking act together. One little girl came over to me and tapped me on the back. There's something wrong with your pancakes. What's wrong with them? They don't taste good. Making breakfast for a whole bunch of hungry kids in the morning is no easy task, especially when you don't know how many are coming or how much they're going to eat. There was one little boy who I was convinced had a tapeworm. He put away so much food it was unbelievable. One day, I saw him stuff some food into his pockets. Would you like some paper to wrap that in? I asked him, tearing off a piece of foil. I wasn't stealing. Tears welled up in his eyes. Of course you weren't. Everything is free here, and you can take as much as you want. But don't you want to wrap it up so your pockets don't get all greasy? It's for my mother. We don't have no food and the stove is broke. You can tell your mother that she can come down if she wants to, and you can take as much food home as you want to. A few of the other kids were looking at us. That goes for everyone. If you want to take a sandwich or something with you, just let me know and I'll give you some wrapping paper for it. After that, I would try to remember to ask if anybody wanted anything to go. Most of the kids were interested. Give me an egg sandwich to go. I want 2 sausages to go. We rarely met the parents. When a new kid joined the program, the parents might drop by to check it out, but in general, they would only come to leave the kids or pick them up. The breakfast program in East Harlem was the poorest. In the middle of winter, some of the kids were without hats, gloves, scarves, and boots and were just some skimpy coats or jackets. When it was possible, we tried to hook them up with something from the free clothing drive. Only once in a while, when everything went smoothly and we were through early, did we get a chance to spend some time with the children. Usually, we were in a rush making sure they got out to school on time. Some of the Panthers wanted them to learn the 10-point program and platform, and others wanted to teach them Panther songs. I preferred talking to them, sitting down with them and exchanging ideas. So we just sort of combined these approaches. We were all dead set against cramming things in their heads or teaching them meaningless note phrases. The children were so naturally curious, we had to take care not to let the food burn while we answered their questions. My closest friends in the party were Daruba, Satawayo, and Jamal. They were all out on bail from the Panther 21 case. They came over to my house and we sat for hours talking politics, the party, North Korea, and what was happening on 116th Street. I learned more in one night than I learned in City College in a month. They had a hard time dealing with me though. I can be stubborn as 6 mules and will argue anyone down until I'm convinced one way or the other. Although I no longer hated white people and no longer saw all of them as an enemy, I was still not too fond of them. As far as I was concerned, it was the duty of black people to work in the black community, and it was the job of white people to go into the white community and organize white people. The brothers were in 100% agreement with that. We also agreed that it was necessary for black, white, Hispanic, Native American, and Oriental people to come together to fight. We disagreed on who and what I should study. Usually, after a disagreement, they suggested I read this or that, often Marx, Lenin, or Engels. I preferred Ho Chi Minh, Kim Il sung, Che, or Fidel, but I ended up having to get into Marx and Lenin just to understand a lot of the speeches and stuff Huey Newton was putting out. It wasn't easy reading, but I was glad I did it. It opened up my horizons a hell of a lot. I didn't relate to them as the great white fathers or like some kind of gods like some of the white revolutionaries did, as far as I was concerned. They were too due to have made contributions to revolutionary struggle too great to be ignored. The more I studied, the more critical I became of the political education program in the party. There were 3 different political education classes: community classes, classes for BPP cadre, and PE classes for Panther leadership. In the community classes, Panthers explained the 10-point program and the general objectives and philosophies of the BPP, as well as various articles that appeared in the Black Panther newspaper. As far as I was concerned, these were the best PE classes the party ever gave. If the teachers were good, the classes were interesting and fun. With a few exceptions, PE classes for party members turned out to be just the opposite. We reviewed articles in the BPP paper, read passages from Mao's Red Book, and discussed certain speeches and articles by various party members. Most of the time, whoever was giving the class discussed whatever we were studying and explained it, but without giving the underlying issues or putting it into any historical context. The basic problem was not whether the teacher was good or bad. The basic problem stemmed from the fact that the BPP had no systemic approach to political education. They were reading the Red Book, but didn't know who Harriet Tubman, Marcus Garvey, and Nat Turner were. They talked about intercommunalism, but still really believed that the Civil War was fought to free the slaves. A whole lot of them barely understood any kind of history, Black, African, or otherwise. Huey Newton had written that politics was war without bloodshed, and that war was politics with bloodshed. To a lot of Panthers, however, struggle consisted of only two aspects: picking up the gun and serving the people. That was the main reason many party members, in my opinion, underestimated the need to unite with other Black organizations and to struggle around various community issues. A lot of the sisters and brothers had joined because they were sick and tired of the oppression they had been suffering. Most of them had never been in the struggle before. Quite a few joined thinking the party was going to issue them a gun and direct them to go out and shoot pigs. Most of these brothers and sisters had attended inferior schools, which either taught them lies or nothing at all. Education of every kind was sorely needed. Without an adequate education program, many Panthers fell into a Roboton bag. They repeated slogans and phrases without understanding their complete meaning, often resulting in dogmatic and short-sighted practices. For example, one day an African brother who was working with one of the African liberation movements came into the office and gave us a beautiful calendar put out by one of the African liberation groups. It was bad. It had beautiful pictures of African freedom fighters and said something like international support for African liberation. The first thing I did was hang it up. When I came to the office the next day, the calendar was gone. When I asked what had happened to it, they said the calendar said international, and we're not internationalists, we're intercommunalists. I am convinced that a systemic program for political education, ranging from the simplest to the highest level, is imperative for any successful organization or movement for Black liberation in this country. The party has some of the most politically conscious sisters and brothers as members, but in some ways, it failed to spread that consciousness to the cadre in general. I also thought it was a real shame the BPP didn't teach Panthers organizing and mobilizing techniques. Some members were natural geniuses at organizing people, but they were usually the busiest comrades with the most responsibility. Part of the problem was that the party had grown so fast that there wasn't a lot of time to come up with step-by-step approaches to things. The other part of the problem was that almost from its inception, the BPP was under attack from the US government. At first, I didn't feel the repression too deeply. I knew the party was under attack, but it felt like it wasn't so near, like it was lingering in the background. What made me maddest was the media treatment of the BPP, which gave the impression that the party was racist and violent, and it worked. The pigs would burst into a Panther's office, shoot first and ask questions later. The press always reported that the police had uncovered, quote unquote, a large arsenal of weapons. Later, when the arsenal turned out to be a few legally registered rifles and shotguns, the press never printed a word. The same thing goes on today. Nobody gets upset about white people having guns, but let a black person have a gun and something criminal is going on. The only time white America is in favor of black people having guns is when we are using them to do America's dirty work. They got a lot of black people so scared they are scared even to think about owning a gun. But the way the tide of racism is rising in this country, black people better be more scared to not have a gun than to have one. With the Ku Klux Klan and all these other racists running around, black people have got to be suicidal if they don't own and know how to operate a gun. If you don't own a gun now, you better rush out and buy one because in a few years, the way this country is moving, it might be against the law for blacks to buy guns. One of the best things about struggling is the people you meet. Before I became involved, I never dreamed such beautiful people existed. Of course, there were some creeps, but I can say without the slightest hesitation that I have been blessed with meeting some of the kindest, most courageous, most principled, most informed, and intelligent people on the face of the earth. I owe a great deal to those who have helped me, loved me, taught me, and pulled my coat when I was moving in the wrong direction. If there is such a thing as luck, I've had an abundance of it, and the ones who have brought it to me are my friends and comrades. My wild, big-hearted friends with their pretty ways and pretty thoughts have given me more happiness than I will ever deserve. There was never a time, no matter what horrible thing I was undergoing, when I felt completely alone. Maybe it's ironic, I don't know, but the one thing I do know is that the Black liberation movement has done more for me than I will ever be able to do for it. Becoming Zaid's friend was something really important. After I joined the party, he would drop by my house every so often. We would listen to music and talk politics. I was forever teasing him about being part of the leadership. He was Minister of Information. Since he was only leader up at the Bronx Ministry, with the exception of Afeni Shakur, I had any respect for him. He would laugh at my Robert Bay jokes, but he never once said a disparaging word about any of the other comrades. I also respected him because he refused to become part of the macho cult that was an official body in the BPP. He never voted on issues or took a position just to be one of the boys. When brothers made an unprincipled attack on sisters, Zaid refused to participate. Whenever we hooked up for a meeting at somebody's house, he was the first to volunteer to cook dinner, or if dinner was already cooked, the first to roll up his sleeves and wash the dishes. I knew this had to be especially hard for him because he was small and his masculinity was always being challenged in some way by the more backward, muscle-headed men in the party. Zaid always treated me and all the other sisters with respect. I enjoyed his friendship because he was one of those rare men completely capable of being friends with a woman without having designs on her. We communicated on such an intense and honest level that afterward I wondered if it had been real. And he was cultured. When you say cultured, most people think you're talking about the opera in Amy Vanderbilt's etiquette book, but that's not what I'm talking about. He was well versed and well educated about every aspect of Black life. He can not only recite Langston Hughes by heart and give a biographical rundown of Coltrane, Bessie Smith, and James Cleveland, but he could also sit down and have an intelligent conversation about dream books or Argo starch eaters. After a while, Zaid asked me to work with him on party projects. It was mostly dealing with white support groups who were involved in raising bail for the Panther 21 members still in jail. I hated it. At the time, I felt that anything below 110th Street was another country. All my activities were centered in Harlem, and I almost never left it. Doing defense community work was definitely not up my alley. I think that one of the reasons I insisted on bringing me to some of these events is that he knew how much I hated them. I was the perfect angry Black Panther. I hated standing around while all these white people asked me to explain myself, my existence. I became a master of the one-line answer. What made you become a Panther? Oppression. What do you think about Huey Newton? He's a right-on black revolutionary leader. What do you think white people should be doing? Organizing other white people in their communities, supporting black and third world liberation struggles, and helping to free the Panther 21. Once a guy asked if I was really going to off the pigs. Not tonight. I couldn't get over how personal some of these people tried to get, even though I'd never seen them before. One came over to me and asked if Zaid was my Panther husband. When I looked at her as if she was crazy for asking me a question like that, she said, giggling all over herself, I mean, is he your cat? Another woman came over and stuck her hands all in my hair. Oh, I just had to touch your hair. It's so kinky. Zaid would be steady, trying to convince the defense groups to raise more money. He explained how important it was to have the Panther 21 out on the street, organizing and educating people about what was going on in America. Zaid was polite and understanding and patient. After he gave his little speech, he would turn to me and ask, what do you think about that, sister? Rapping in my best Panther cadence, I would say something like, Black people have been oppressed for 400 years. We are still being oppressed. The Panther 21 don't need any moral support. They need concrete support. They don't want to hear that you sympathize with them. They want to hear that you are willing and ready to help liberate them. When we were finished, a second donation would be given. Zaid was usually cool and poised at these functions, except once. We were at a meeting with the Computer People for Peace, a group that was helping to raise the money to bail out Sandia Okole. Zaid and Sandita should be the next Panther to be bailed out because, Zaid said Sandita should be the next Panther to be bailed out because his leadership qualities were sorely needed in the party. One guy kept interrupting him, implying that Zaid was pushing for Sandia's release because they were friends, that he was being subjective and dealing from an emotional rather than a scientific objective analysis. Zaid's face underwent a complete change. I could see that he was trying to control himself to keep from going off on this dude. What do you mean I'm being subjective? Don't you ever open your mouth to me to tell me I'm subjective as long as you live. My brother Lumumba, my own flesh and blood, has also been locked up for more than a year, and I haven't asked you for a dime to bail him out. Lumumba Shakur was one of the Panther 21. A complete hush came over the room. The computer people said they would do everything they could to raise money for Sandia's bail, and that's what they did. The only thing was that once the $100,000 cash bail was raised, Pig Judge Mark took some cracker's name I'm mispronouncing, I don't care, refused to release him or any of the others. We were furious and helpless. After a while, everything seemed strange to me. I was catching all these weird vibrations and sensations. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I could sense a whole lot of stuff going on. I felt like I was standing on top of a river with currents swirling down underneath the surface. All these strange things were starting to happen. I would go to the laundromat and find a black policeman there who said he wanted to join the party. Every once in a while, I'd turn around and see strange men following me. Even though I had no money to pay my telephone bill and I had long stopped paying it, the telephone kept working, and after a while, I stopped receiving any bills. Politically, I was not at all happy with the direction of the party. Huey went on a nationwide tour advocating his new theory of intercommunality. Whew. The essence of the theory was that imperialism had reached such a degree that sovereign borders were no longer recognized and that oppressed nations no longer existed, only oppressed communities within and outside the U.S. The problem was that somebody had forgotten to tell these oppressed communities that they were no longer nations. Even worse, almost no one understood Huey's long speeches explaining intercommunalism. Huey Newton was not what you would call a good speaker. In fact, he had a kind of high-pitched, monotonous voice, and his ramblings were monotonous voice, and his rambling for 3 hours about the negation of the negation was sheer disaster. People walked out in droves. Instead of criticizing what was happening, most of the Panther members defended it. When I said that Huey needed speaking lessons, they jumped down my throat. When Huey changed his title from defense minister to the ridiculous sounding supreme commander, and then went to the even more ridiculous supreme servant, damn near nobody said a word. That was one of the big problems in the party. Criticism and self-criticism were not encouraged, and the little that was given often was not taken seriously. Constructive criticism and self-criticism are extremely important for any revolutionary organization. Without them, people tend to drown in their mistakes, not learn from them. Because I was still a college student, I was often called on by the BPP to do student work. I didn't mind working with students to coordinate this or that, but I was deathly afraid of speaking in public. But they insisted I had to learn in order to be effective on campus. I had an old rickety tape recorder that was on its last legs. I decided to use it to practice public speaking. On and on I went, blah, 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 into the microphone. The telephone rang. I put the mic down and turned off the recorder and rushed to the phone. Hello, JoAnne? Stop making tapes, the voice said. The phone clicked. I stood there with the receiver in my hand. I had to get out of there. I ran to get my coat. I needed some privacy to think. Every day at the office, things were getting stranger and stranger. Rumors that the pigs were going to attack the office were rampant. Convinced of the invasion, the leadership decided to secure the office. The big storefront window was removed and replaced by a wooden partition. Windows without glass were cut into the wood, covered by little wooden doors. What are all those little holes for? I asked. To shoot out of, they told me. Piles of sandbags were brought into the office. I didn't believe that shit. Everybody was talking about defending the office. Why do we have to defend the office? I asked. They told me something about executive mandate number 3. It said Panthers were supposed to defend the office against pig attacks. I was all in favor of self-defense, but I couldn't see giving my life up just to defend the office. It's the principle of the thing, they told me. I didn't understand what principle they were talking about. One of the basic laws of people's struggle was to retreat when the enemy is strong and to attack when the enemy is weak. As far as I was concerned, defending the office was suicidal. The pigs had manpower, initiative, surprise, and gunpowder. We would just be sitting ducks. I felt the party was dealing from an emotional rather than rational basis. Just because you believe in self-defense doesn't mean you let yourself be sucked into defending yourself on the enemy's terms. One of the party's major weaknesses, I thought, was the failure to clearly differentiate between above-ground political struggle and underground, clandestine military struggle. An above-ground political organization can't wage guerrilla war any more than an underground army can do above-ground political work. Although the two must work together, they must have completely separate structures, and any links between the two must remain secret. Educating the people about the necessity for self-defense and for armed struggle was one thing, but maintaining a policy of defending party offices against insurmountable odds was another. Of course, if the police just came in and started shooting, defending yourself made sense. But the point is to try and prevent that from happening. One day, in the not too distant future, any Black organization that is not based on bootlicking and tomming will be forced underground. And as fast as this country is moving to the fascist far right, Black revolutionary organizations should start preparing for the inevitability. Fascist governments do not permit revolutionary or progressive opposition groups to exist, no matter how peaceful or nonviolent they are. It doesn't matter whether the fascist government simply outlaws the groups like like in Nazi Germany, or mount a counterintelligence campaign to destroy opposition groups, like in the US. It was growing more and more impossible to get work done. Everything seemed to be in a continuous state of chaos. The party decided at one point to open a Saturday liberation school for children, and I was assigned to that project. I was really ecstatic about it because I love working with children, and I was really tired of adults at that time. Being my usual reserved self, I threw every bit of energy I had into the project. I collected books, materials, paints, photographs, children's Black history stories, children's records, etc. Two other cadres were assigned to the project. Everybody pitched in, and after a few weeks, we had a whole pile of children attending. Just as we got the program on its feet, I was called aside and taken into confidence. The party had information that the pigs were going to raid the office in about 2 weeks. If the pigs were going to attack the office, why would they bother to tell us? I asked. We have our sources, sister, I was told. Just like the pigs have their sources, we have ours. I was skeptical, but I figured they knew more about it than I did. In preparation for the coming attack, I was asked to prepare a child care place, a safe house for Panther children. It sounded kind of wild, but I agreed to do it. In the back of my mind, I half thought they were testing me to see how I would respond in a crisis. I put the child care thing together. 2 weeks came and went, but there was no invasion. In addition, a lot of things were going on that I was not too happy about. Plans, priorities, and procedures changed daily, and most of the time, the changes were ill conceived. Everything had an arbitrary air to it, and I certainly did not have the feeling that we were waging a step by step analytical struggle. There was little internal conflict in either the Harlem branch or the New York chapter. For the most part, Panthers were a friendly, open group of people who really went out of their way to be kind and helpful, and in spite of all the pressure and hardships they had to deal with, managed to be principled and to fight as hard as they knew how for our people. We had a bit of leadership problem with Robert Bay and Jolly, who were both from the West Coast. Bay's problem was that he was none too bright and that he had an aggressive, even belligerent way of talking and dealing with people. Jolly's problem was that he was Robert Bay's shadow. Bay later became Huey Newton's bodyguard, a job for which he was much more suited. Cotton had come to Harlem from California. Everybody loved him. He was everybody's main man. He had known Bunchy Carter, Little Bobby Hutton, the Chief, David Hillard, and of course, the Rage, Eldridge Cleaver, aka the rapist. It doesn't say that, but I have to say that every time that fucker's name comes up. Cotton had been sent to New York and put in charge of fixing up the brownstone the party had bought on 127th Street. According to the grapevine, Huey wanted to move BPP headquarters to New York, and Cotton was to prepare the security for the house. He used to mosey over to the Harlem office with a bottle of cheap pluck in his back pocket and tell war stories. He would sip his wine and talk about what had gone down on the coast. The first time I went over to inspect the 127th Street house, Cotton gave me a guided tour. He explained the whole futuristic security plan. He was going to hook up the security system so that if so much as a foot was put on the front steps of the building, an alarm would alert the security officer inside. If it was the pigs, huge floodlights would be turned on, blinding them. Thick metal doors would glide into place, and a lot of other fantastic things would happen that I don't remember. I kept my mouth shut because I knew absolutely nothing about security, but I silently wondered why he didn't put in stuff that was more conventional, like a closed-circuit TV. I had a special interest in the building since the ground floor and the basement were designated to be the free health clinic. At the time, the basement was a disaster with no plumbing, no heat, no electricity, and a mountain load of bricks, powder, and debris. Cotton assured me that the basement would be fixed up within 6 months. Next, He showed me Huey's room. It was the only room in the house somewhat fixed up. He had put up wooden paneling. There was a small table and a single bed, which he carefully explained to me was made up in military style, ready at all times for the minister. I looked at him like he was crazy. Of all the things I could imagine Huey doing, sleeping in that freezing house on that Spartan bed was not one of them. Cotton talked about Huey with this eerie reverence that made me sick. And it sounded sure enough weird how Cotton talked about the minister's bed. I visited the house on 127th Street many times over the next few months. Hard as I tried, I could not find one shred of progress. I came to the conclusion that Cotton was a big mouth and a drunk. But everybody kept telling me how hard he was working. So I figured he was working on something secret that they had obviously decided not to tell me about. During one of my trips to the house, Cotton's assistant told me he didn't feel well. I made an appointment with the doctor and called to tell him the time. A few days later, when I came into the office, everyone looked at me like I had committed some crime against the people. "What's wrong?" I asked. Cotton says Cotton says that the brother who works for him is sick and that you refuse to do anything for him. What? I was completely surprised. That's not true. Cotton says that's what happened. Fired up, mad, I tried to get Cotton on the phone, but it was out of order. It took me several days to get that thing straight, but finally the assistant confirmed that I had made the doctor's appointment for him, but that he had neglected to keep it and had gone home instead. I tried to figure out why Cotton had made such a fuss. The only conclusion I could come to is that he was annoyed with me because I kept pushing him to get the clinic in order. Several years later, after the Freedom of Information Act was passed, it was revealed that Cotton had been working undercover for the police. Things seemed to be going from bad to worse. Although there wasn't much dissension in the New York branch, there was beaucoup dissension and disunity on the national level. Every other weekend, somebody was going out to the West Coast to deal with contradictions. Everybody was uptight and miserable, and then everything started to happen at once. First, there was an article stating that Huey was living in a $650 a month apartment in Oakland. The Harlem branch was shocked because in those days, that was a whole lot of rent, and it contrasted sharply with the living conditions of the Panthers in New York. Panthers who owned little more than the clothes on their backs were out in the street in the freezing cold weather selling papers with big pieces of cardboard in their shoes, with flimsy jackets that did nothing to hold back the hawk. The party issued a statement that Huey was living in the apartment for security purposes, but a lot of Panthers were not at all convinced. I wanted to believe the security story, but it didn't fit my sense of logic. Then came the long series of expulsions, which proved to be the last straw. Many long-standing, loyal Panthers were being expelled by Huey. One of the first to go in Huey's private purge was Geronimo Elmer Pratt. Geronimo was widely respected, somewhat of a Panther folk hero. When I heard about it, the first thing I did was go to someone who would know and try to find out the real deal. Although paranoid and upset, the person broke down the story to me, just enough to let me know the expulsion was probably unjust. I couldn't imagine Geronimo being an enemy of the people any more than I could imagine myself being one. Then came the expulsions of the Panther 21, supposedly for writing an open letter to the weathermen that was somewhat critical of BPP policies. I had read the letter and could find nothing in it to merit such extreme action, especially since it might prove prejudicial to their ongoing trial. I was becoming more and more critical of what was going on in the party, but I loved it nevertheless and wanted to see it functioning on the right track. For the first time, I questioned whether I could continue within the party. Almost every project I was working on was frustrated and barely able to get off the ground. The Saturday Liberation School, the free health clinic, and a lot of student work were all on hold. I felt frustrated and a bit demoralized. This party was a lot different from the Black Panther Party I had fallen in love with. Gone were the black berets and leather jackets because of police harassment. Panthers had been ordered to not wear the uniform except for special occasions. Gone were the Panther marches, the Panther songs. Gone were the Free Huey, Free Bobby songs sung to the tune of Wade in the Water. Gone were the big Panther buttons, the big Panther flags flapping in the wind. Everything felt different. The easy, friendly openness had been replaced by fear and paranoia. The beautiful revolutionary creativity I had loved so much was gone and replaced by dogmatic stagnation. It was around this time that Zaid and I had our big falling out. I had made a list of the criticisms of the party, along with the list of things I thought were positive, and a lot of suggestions I thought might correct some of the problems the party was facing. I called Zaid and told him I needed to talk to him. When he arrived, I bared my heart and soul to him. I must have talked for a good 2 or 3 hours, raising all of the political and tactical concerns I had. Zaid listened to everything I said without taking any position one way or the other. Then he told me he had to leave and would talk to me another time. I was furious. I felt like he was acting in his role as quote unquote leadership and using our friendship to gain information about how I thought to gauge the level of dissension within the ranks. Throughout my days in the party, I've always been outspoken and blunt. Zaid and I had always been frank with each other, and I interpreted his silence as a declaration that he supported and defended policies I considered unprincipled and politically incorrect. After that, we didn't see or speak to each other for a long time. I had no way of knowing the thin tightrope he was walking or the pressure he was under. Zaid was acting as peacemaker between Huey and the Black Panther 21, furiously trying to get Huey to rescind his expulsion order. Zaid felt that to take any position in reference to problems within the party might jeopardize his role and result in dire consequences for the Panther 21. Daruba, who had not been expelled because they were. Hold on, let me grab some water. I read that wrong. Setueo and Daruba, who have been expelled because they were out on bail, had not signed the letter, were also attempting to get the Panther 21 reinstated. They were under a lot of pressure from both sides. Huey wanted them to support the expulsion, and the expelled Panthers wanted them to criticize Huey's actions. Like Zaid, Set and Daruba honestly believed they could straighten out the madness. And were it not for the FBI, they probably could have. Nobody back then had ever heard of the counterintelligence program COINTELPRO, set up by the FBI. Nobody could possibly have known that the FBI had sent a phony letter to Eldridge Cleaver in Algiers, signed by the Panther 21, criticizing Huey Newton's leadership. No one could have known that the FBI had sent a letter to Huey's brothers saying the New York Panthers were plotting to kill him. No one could have known that the FBI's COINTELPRO was attempting to destroy the Black Panther Party in particular and the Black Liberation Movement in general, using divide and conquer tactics. The FBI's COINTELPRO program consisted of turning members of organizations against each other, pitting one Black organization against another. Huey ended up suspending Set and Daruba from the party, branded them as enemies of the people, and caused them to go into hiding in fear for their very lives. No one had the slightest idea that this whole scenario was carefully manipulated and orchestrated by the FBI. When they brought the Black Panther newspaper to the office, the one that had branded Daruba, Set, and Set's wife, Connie Matthews Tabor, as enemies of the people, I refused to sell it and attacked it as an outright lie. I had been so outspoken about my criticisms that I knew it was just a matter of time before I too would be expelled. Sick and disgusted, I decided it was time for me to leave the party. Most of the Panthers understood why I left. and I stayed on good terms with them. They would call me and ask if they could drop by or sleep over at my crib. Almost daily, I got a blow-by-blow description of what was going on in the party. The tension had increased even more, the differences between the New York cadre and the West Coast leadership growing even wider. I tried to stress to the comrades what I saw to be the importance of everybody sitting down and resolving their differences. No such thing occurred. In fact, a group came to my house jumping for joy. They had split from the West Coast leadership. It really saddened me that they had not been able to sit down together and mend their differences. After I left the party, my life became more and more impossible. Everywhere I went, it seemed like I would turn around to find two detectives following behind me. I would look out my window, and there, in the middle of Harlem, in front of my house, would be two white men sitting and reading the newspaper. I was scared to death to talk in my own house. When I wanted to say something that was not public information, I turned the record player up real loud so that the buggers would have a hard time hearing. It was so weird. I still hadn't received the telephone bill, and months had gone by since I paid the last one. Yet, the telephone was always working. Strange people visited my neighbors asking questions. I hated to move from my apartment because the rent was so cheap. I was paying something like $65 a month, and if you could get used to the fifth floor walk up, it wasn't bad at all. It was one of those rent controlled buildings right across the street from City College where I was enrolled. I had no choice but to leave. It was impossible to live amid all those bugging devices. I decided to donate the apartment to the Panthers and look for somewhere else to live and to spend time with some friends, passing a few days here and a few days there until I found another place. One day, as I was zipping up the avenue on my way home, a friend called me over. "What's up?" I asked. "Don't go home." "What do you mean, don't go home?" "Your place is crawling with pigs. They're waiting for you." I walked around for a while trying to get my head together. What could they do to me if I went home? I hadn't done anything. I thought about the Panther 21. They hadn't done anything either. Anyway, they can do anything they want. I thought about my crib. Maybe they had been taping my voice and hooking up pieces of conversation to make it seem like there was a conspiracy to do something. Maybe they would charge me with harboring a fugitive or with conspiracy to harbor a fugitive. Everybody said they were tailing me so tough because they thought I would lead them to Set, to Ruba, or some other comrade that had been forced into hiding. Maybe they would try to interrogate me, beat and torture me until I signed some phony confession or something. I decided one thing right then and there. I definitely wasn't going home, and I definitely wasn't answering anybody's questions about anything. I thought of going to Evelyn's, but I figured that as soon as I showed, the pigs would be there waiting for me. I decided the best thing I could do was lay low until I found out what was going on and could come to some decision. And that's the end of chapter 15. And this is going to be chapter 16. Grab some water. My initial image of the underground was pure fantasy. When Zayed talked about the underground, I actually pictured people in some basement, passing through some hidden bookcase door and disappearing into thin air. I pictured all kinds of elaborate I Spy kinds of hookups, outrageous disguises, false panels, stuff right out of the Mission Impossible. I was shocked when I ran into a brother I knew in a supermarket. I knew the pigs were looking for him. He had shaved all the hair off his face, but he looked almost the same. I had to catch myself to keep from calling out to him. I just kept walking, feeling that somehow seeing me would make him nervous. Even though I had always thought that someday I'd probably be involved in clandestine struggle, I had never given any serious thoughts to going underground. I had more or less thought of a clandestine struggle in terms of leading a double life. I thought the ideal way to struggle was to have a regular job or whatever as a front, and then go out at night or whenever and do what needed to be done, careful to leave no trails. I still think that this is the best way. but you have to anticipate being discovered and be prepared for whatever might happen. At the end of the 60s or the beginning of the 70s, it seemed like people were going underground left and right. Every other week, I was hearing about somebody disappearing. Police repression had come down so hard on the Black movement that it seemed as if the entire Black community was on the FBI's most wanted list. The repression had come down so fast that many people had no chance whatsoever to get organized. I was kind of in limbo, slipping back and forth between above and below. As far as I could tell, I was only wanted for questioning. I hadn't done anything, and I didn't feel that the situation was too grave. I had to be discreet and change some of my habits, but I felt relatively free to move around above ground and underground without too much problem. I had no intentions of answering anybody's questions, and so I figured I'd just lay low until the heat was over. There were so many things needed to be done. Basically, I was working with the railroad support network stations, trying to find the basic necessities for people and trying to help them get to where they wanted to go. It was a job that required real caution and a lot of concentration on detail. Over a short period of time, I found that my powers of observation had increased many times over. I had to keep my eyes on everything that was going on, looking ahead and at the same time glancing over my shoulder. The work was interesting and well suited to my restless, active temperament, but I found it kind of hard to change my way of relating to people. I'd always been open and trusting, and I was finding it really hard to change. It took me almost getting killed for me to develop a more suspicious nature. I was running into quite a few people, some of whom I knew and others whom I didn't. Different collectives, members of different organizations from different parts of the country. I was surprised at how disorganized many people were, and I was all for seeing them organize themselves in a much more disciplined manner. I was straining to understand some of the things I saw, but people were moving so fast, it was hard to keep track of what they were doing. The whole situation was new to me, and I guess all of us were trying to make heads or tails out of it, trying to get a good grip on what was happening and where we fit into it. I had heard it on the radio, had seen some of the reports on TV. My reaction was, wow, the tables were turning. As many Black people as the New York Police Department murdered every year, someone was finally paying them back. The media were filled with countless adjectives: senseless, brutal, vicious, deadly, bloody, etc. On May 19th, Malcolm X's birthday, 2 police had been machine gunned on Riverside Drive. I felt sorry for their families, sorry for their children, but I was relieved to see that somebody else besides Black folks and Puerto Ricans and Chicanos were being shot at. I was sick and tired of us being the only victims, and I didn't care who knew it. As far as I was concerned, the police in the Black communities were nothing but a foreign occupying army, beating, torturing, and murdering people at whim and without restraint. I despise violence, but I despise it even more when it's one-sided and used to oppress and repress poor people. But I was still in a state of shock. The shit was so real. I mean, it was happening. Somebody was doing what the rest of us merely had fantasies about. I had an early morning meeting. My friend went to the corner to pick up the papers and something to munch on. He came back, all excited. Look at this, sister. A time you should look at this. Oh, I'm sorry. I think you should look at this. Hold on, I'll grab some water. I don't want to look at anything right now. I want something to eat. What did you buy to eat? This is serious, sister. Look, will you come over and look at this? Man, I don't want to read no paper. I'm starving, I said. Nevertheless, I went over and picked up the papers. Oh shit was the only thing that would come out of my mouth. Hungrily, I read every word of the article. I stared down at my picture on the front of the page of the Daily News. The paper said I was wanted for questioning in relation to the machine gunning. Shit. I walked aimlessly around in circles. I couldn't believe it, but I was looking at it. You've got to get out of here, my friend said. Where am I supposed to go? I don't know, but we got to get you out of here. Maybe you can go and hook up with the people. I knew that I had to hook up with some people in the underground, but this was no time to go around hunting for people. Strangely enough, I felt calm and I wanted to stay that way. I asked my friend to go and get me a wig and some other things to enable me to move around a little bit. While he went to get the things I needed, I went through my address book and made mental notes of the people who the pigs could easily trace me to. I had to stifle the desire to call my mother and tell her that, at least for the moment, I was relatively safe and that I loved her. Once I got out into the street, I could feel the tension in my body. I walked down the street searching for signs on people's faces. I walked a few blocks before I realized that not a soul in the world was paying me any mind. I heard some feet running behind me and swung around, only to find it was a bunch of children. I had planned to go to my girlfriend's house and decided I'd still head that way. She lived alone in a quiet neighborhood, and I knew that it would be damn near impossible for anyone to trace me to her. Her life consisted almost completely of working and going to school at night. I was a little nervous when I got to her door. Maybe I was doing the wrong thing, getting her hooked into all of this. Maybe she would be angry at me for coming at all. I decided that I wouldn't stay. I would just stop by to explain to her why I was late and to tell her goodbye. She answered the door with a towel wrapped around her head. What the hell took you so long? How did I begin? A funny thing happened to me on the way to your house. That's something I've got to tell you, I began. I just stopped by to say goodbye. The police are looking for me. My picture is plastered all over the daily news. I don't believe this is happening, but it is. I know, she told me. What I want to know is what took you so long to get here. I stared at her, completely surprised. I didn't understand. If she knew what happened, why was she expecting me? I just dropped by for a minute to let you know what happened and to let you know that I'm okay. Are you okay? I told her I was. Where are you going? I told her that I was going to try to hook up with some people I knew. Where do you have to go? Do you have any money? Do you know how to contact these people? Do you need any help? I told her that I had just found out what was happening and that I was just going to have to play it by ear, slipping and sliding for a while until I could make contact. Girl, you crazy? You militants ain't got no sense. Would you take the shit off your head and sit down so I can talk to you? She always referred to me and my comrades as you militants. She was a militant too, but at the moment, she was not active, not out on Front Street, as she called it. Do you have this address written down anywhere or this phone number? No, nobody even knows who you are or that we even know each other. Luckily, I had never made a habit of writing too much down, and since things had gotten so hot, I put most of the numbers that I had for contacts on code. I knew all my friends' numbers by heart, so that was no problem. I had never even called her from the 138th Street phone at my last place. I told her that as far as I knew, there was no way I could be traced to her. Then relax, fool. It don't make no sense for you to be out there in the street moving around right now. You gotta relax and get your head together. Look, I told her, I don't want to impose on you. This is my thing, not yours, and I don't want to involve you in my stuff. Woman, will you please shut up? This ain't your thing. This is our thing. You done involved me in it already, and if I didn't want to be bothered, I wouldn't have opened my door. I'm your friend, and I trust you and love you. I'll hide you out any old time. Where did you think you were going to hide out anyways? On the moon? I stared at her in amazement. I had never really known her. A real sister, tough, critical, a bit too cynical, but a real stand-up woman. Here, she said, handing me a knife and some onions and potatoes. Make yourself useful. Even y'all militants gotta eat. I just sat there, grinning and peeling potatoes, talking and feeling really at home. It's early in the morning. I have to move. The move has got to be made with care since my picture has just been plastered all over the newspapers. Wanted posters of me are everywhere, and somebody had told me that the police have a photograph of me in the space over the glove compartment of their cars. Carefully, I arrange my disguise. It has been designed not to stand out, something that will help me blend in with the other people who would be on the subway early in the morning. I stare at myself in the mirror, debating whether to look like a secretary or a maid. It's too early in the morning for secretaries, and I decided to look like a poor black woman. Thick, ugly stockings, run over black Oxfords, beat up black plastic pocketbook, hand me down looking plaid jacket, and of course, a Lord have mercy looking wig. My puffy morning face, smudged with a dab of awkward looking yellow eyebrow pencil and lipstick, are perfect for the look. I walk down to the subway, stopping to buy the paper. I stand on the platform waiting for the train. I thumb the newspapers, making sure that no familiar photographs appear. I skim the headlines to find the usual assortment of right-wing half lies, distortions, and scandal stories. The headlines, as usual, are offensive. Commie land in outer space. Cops nab light bulb bandit. Hobby ties knot with country gal. Finally, the train comes. I scan the cars as they pass, looking for the transit cop. Seeing none, I move toward the front of the train. I plop down in a vacant seat and immediately stick my head into the newspaper. Carefully, I look around to see who's riding in the car with me. In an instant, I'm reproaching myself for leaving too early in the morning. I have an eerie feeling that something is wrong, but I can't put my finger on it. The subway car has a Twilight Zone air to it. With the exception of a few white men who look like they are going to factory jobs, the rest are black women. One has on a nurse's uniform, another looks like she's going to church, hat and all, and the rest of them look more or less like me. I keep staring at them, and it registers. Without one exception, every one of these sisters is wearing a wig. It feels so spooky. I'm hiding my beautiful nappy hair under this wig and hating it, hiding my stuff to save my life. I, who have had to give up my head wraps and my big beaded earrings, my dungaree jackets, my red, black, and green poncho, and my long African dresses in order to struggle on another level, look out from under my wig at my sisters. Maybe we are all running and hiding. Maybe we are all running from something, all living a clandestine existence. Surely, we are all being oppressed and persecuted. I imagine the headlines. Nigger woman nabbed for nappy hair. Afro gal has tangled hair. Militant mom bears all. It is really too much to comprehend. Such horrible things have been done to us. A whole generation of black women hiding out under dead white people's hair. I have the urge to cry, but I don't. It would draw attention. I keep from getting up until my stop comes. I pray and struggle for the day when we can all come out from under these wigs. This poem is called Current Events. I understand that I am slightly out of fashion. The in crowd wants no part of me. Someone said that I am 260s, black. Someone else told me I had failed to be mellow. It is true I have not straightened back my hair, nor rediscovered Maybelline. And it is also true that I still like African things, like statues and dresses and people. And it is also true that struggle is foremost in my mind. And I still rap about discipline. My anger has not run away. And I still can't stand old El Dorado. And I still can't dig no one-on-one. And I still don't dig no Rockefellers. And I call a pig a pig. And a party to my thinking happens only once in a while. Anyway, I'm really kind of happy being slightly out of style. This is chapter 17. Over the next few years, home became a lot of places. I traveled quite a bit and met up with some really beautiful people. People so beautiful, They restored my faith in humanity each time I passed through their station. Like most of us back in those days, I was new at this, learning about clandestine struggle as I lived it. I didn't have many fixed ideas at first about what I thought armed struggle within the confines of America should be like. I had done a lot of reading about it in other places, but I had no concrete idea how to apply the lessons from those struggles to the struggle of Black people within the United States. It was clear that the Black Liberation Army was not a centralized, organized group with a common leadership and a chain of command. Instead, there were various organizations and collectives working out of different cities, and in some of the larger cities, there were often several groups working independently of each other. Many members of the various groups have been forced into hiding as a result of the extreme police repression that took place during the late 60s and early 70s. Some had serious cases, some had minor ones, and others, like me, were just wanted for questioning. Sisters and brothers joined these groups because they were committed to revolutionary struggle in general and armed struggle in particular, and wanted to help build the armed movement in America. It was the strangest feeling. People I used to run into at rallies were now in hiding, sending messages that they wanted to hook up. Sisters and brothers from just about every revolutionary or militant group in the country were either rotting away in prison or had been forced underground. Everyone I talked to was interested in taking the struggle to a higher level. But the question was how? How to bring together all these people scattered around the country into an organized body that would be effective in struggling for Black liberation. It became evident, almost from the beginning, that consolidation was not a good idea. There were too many security problems, and different groups had different ideologies, different levels of political consciousness, and different ideas about how armed struggle in America should be waged. On the whole, we were weak, inexperienced, disorganized, and seriously lacking in training. But the biggest problem was one of the political development. There were sisters and brothers who had been so victimized by America that they were willing to fight to the death against their oppressors. They were intelligent, courageous, and dedicated, willing to make any sacrifice. But we were to find out quickly that courage and dedication were not enough. To win any struggle for liberation, you have to have the way as well as the will, an overall ideology and strategy that stem from a scientific analysis of history and present conditions. Some of the groups thought they could just pick up arms and struggle, and that somehow people would see what they were doing and begin to struggle themselves. They wanted to engage in a do or die battle with the power structure in America, even though they were weak and ill prepared for such a fight. But the most important factor is that armed struggle by itself can never bring about revolution. Revolutionary war is a people's war, and no people's war can be won without the support of the masses of people. Armed struggle can never be successful by itself. It must be part of an overall strategy for winning, and the strategy must be political as well as military. Since we did not own the TV stations or newspapers, it was easy for the news media to portray us as monsters and terrorists. The police could terrorize the Black community daily, yet if one Black person successfully defended himself or herself against a police attack, they were called terrorists. It soon became clear to me that our most important battle was to help politically mobilize, educate, and organize the masses of Black people and to win their minds and hearts. It was inconceivable that we could survive, much less win anything, without their support. Every group fighting for freedom is bound to make mistakes, but unless you study the common, fundamental laws of armed revolutionary struggle, you are bound to make unnecessary mistakes. Revolutionary war is protracted warfare. It is impossible for us to win quickly. To win, we have got to wear down our oppressors, little by little, and at the same time, strengthen our forces, slowly but surely. I understood some of my more impatient sisters and brothers. I knew that it was tempting to substitute military for a political struggle, especially since all of our above-ground organizations were under vicious attack by the FBI, the CIA, and the local police agencies. All of us who saw our leaders murdered, our people shot down in cold blood, felt a need, a desire to fight back. One of the hardest lessons we had to learn is that revolutionary struggle is scientific rather than emotional. I'm not saying that we shouldn't feel anything, but decisions can't be based on love or on anger. They have to be based on the objective conditions and on what is the rational, unemotional thing to do. In 1857, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that blacks were only 3/5 of a man and had no rights that whites were bound to respect. Today, more than 125 years later, we still earn less than 3/5 of what white people earn. It was plain to me that we couldn't look to the courts for freedom and justice any more than we could expect to gain our liberation by participating in the U.S. political system. And it was pure fantasy to think we could gain them by begging. The only alternative left was to fight for them, and we are going to have to fight like any other people who have fought for liberation. I wasn't one who believed that we should wait until our political struggle had reached a high point before we began to organize the underground. I felt that it was important to start building underground structures as soon as possible. And although it felt that the major task of the underground should be organizing and building, I didn't feel that armed acts of resistance should be ruled out. As long as they didn't impede our long-range plans, guerrilla units should be able to carry out a few well-planned, well-timed armed actions that were well-coordinated with above-ground political objectives. Not any old kind of actions, but actions that Black people would clearly understand and support, and actions that were well publicized in the Black community. So that's chapter 18. When did I start this? It's been an hour. I'll go ahead and read this chapter. Let me grab some water. After my acquittal in the Queens Bank robbery case in Brooklyn Federal Court on January 16, 1976, I was brought back to New Jersey, placed in the basement of the Middlesex County Jail for Men in solitary confinement, and held there for more than a year until the Jersey trial was over. Lennox Hines, then the head of the National Conference of Black Lawyers, together with the other members of the defense team, filed a civil suit against the state, charging that my conditions were cruel and inhuman. After a long, drawn-out court battle, both sides agreed that a hearing officer should review my jail conditions and make a ruling. The hearing officer was a man named Polchnik, who was appointed by the state. We had no say whatsoever in who was appointed and therefore expected the decision to be favorable to the state. But he surprised everybody and ruled that my conditions of imprisonment were indeed inhuman and recommended that they be changed at once. But through a series of appeals and legal maneuvers, the state succeeded in keeping me confined in that basement. When the government finds it convenient to follow its own laws and administrative procedures, it does. And when it finds that these same laws are inconvenient for their own purposes, it simply ignores them. I decided that I wanted Stanley Cohen and Evelyn to work together on the case. This turned out to be a mistake, since they were not exactly in love with each other. Neither Stanley nor Evelyn was a New Jersey lawyer, and we had to get a New Jersey lawyer to be on the case. Ray Brown was busy with other commitments and couldn't possibly do it. Stanley asked a young white New Jersey lawyer named Stuart Ball, and after some reservations, he agreed to be the admitting lawyer. Stanley also wanted a young lawyer, Lawrence Stern, to act as his assistant. Even though Evelyn was involved in the defense and Lennox was handling the civil suit around my prison conditions, the Conference of Black Lawyers assigned a young Black lawyer from Mississippi named Lewis Myers to work on the case. I was delighted. Everyone knew that the New Jersey trial was the big one and that my chances of receiving a fair trial were about slim to none. So the strategy was to try to surround the defense team with as much resources and expertise as possible. It sounded like a good idea, but if there was ever a case of too many cooks in the kitchen, this case was it. Almost from the beginning, the defense team was beset by personality conflicts. The problem was magnified greatly by the fact that nobody was being paid. The lawyers were having problems covering even their bare expenses. It seemed like every other month, one or another of the lawyers was asking the judge to be relieved from the case. We were in dire need of experts. We needed to find a ballistics expert, a forensic chemist, and among others, to refute the state's charges. We were also in desperate need of an investigator to locate some of the doctors who had treated me while I was hospitalized and other potential witnesses. We fought and harped on this point until finally the judge, Theodore Appleby, issued an order that the state pay for the experts. But once we got the order, we found that we were in the same position that we started from. Without exception, everybody that we went to for help turned us down. The types of experts we needed almost always are police or are working for police agencies. Because my case involved the murder of a police officer, none of them would touch the case. The most crucial part of the prosecutor's case was the scientific testimony, alleging that I had huge amounts of the dead state trooper's blood on me. We wanted someone who knew what they were doing to go over every inch of those clothes, to check out what was on them, and also to check out what had been done to them. But we could not find one forensic chemist to work for us, let alone testify for us. If they had, they would never again have been able to work in peace for any police agency. People never hear about this side of a trial, but there is no place of a defendant in a criminal trial can go to find experts in science, commonly known as police sciences. The police can virtually write up a report saying anything they want, and there is no way of refuting it. And there have been cases where experts have been double agents, working for a defendant while secretly working with the prosecutor. One of the amazing things was the number of student supporters who gave their time and energy to help us. They volunteered to index and organize past transcripts, and together with political activists, did a survey of prospective jurors in Middlesex County. Members of the defense committee published a bulletin to keep people informed about what was happening in the case, and also did speaking engagements and fundraising. People circulated petitions and demonstrated in front of the courtroom. They volunteered to do typing, handle the telephones, etc. Entertainers like Harry Belafonte, Ossie Davis, and Ruby Dee performed at fundraising benefits. Poets like June Jordan, Audre Lorde, and Sonia Sanchez, among others, gave poetry readings. Political activists like Angela Davis and Amari Baraka worked hard to educate the people about what was happening in New Jersey. When Angela Davis came to New Jersey to do a speaking engagement on my behalf, the New Jersey prosecutor's office ambushed her and her party, harassing them until the moment they left the state. She tried to visit me at the jail, and not only did the judge forbid her to visit me, but he stopped all of my other visits as well. One of the most moving statements I have ever heard was a speech Judge Bruce Wright made at a fundraising rally for me. Judge Bruce Rice is a Black judge who was removed from the criminal court bench in New York because he was too fair and honest, and he did something that was unforgivable. He set poor people's bail at amounts they could afford to pay. The courts will never be anything but a tool of repression until there are judges like Bruce Wright presiding over Black people's trials. There were many, many people who I never got to meet, even though they worked so hard on my behalf. And even though I never got a chance to thank all the Black people, white people, third world people, all the students, feminists, revolutionaries, activists, etc., who worked on the case, I thank you now. A lot of the pre-trial conferences had to do with nothing more than the defense making motions and the judge denying them. Every time we went to court, the judge made a point of reading into the record that I had refused to stand up for him. He was one of those racist white dogs who really believed he was massa. He really took that your honor stuff seriously. If he could have made people bow to him and kiss his hand, he would have done it. He claimed that he was a stickler for the decorum of his courtroom. Plenty of decorum, but not a bit of justice. Stand for him? It was out of the question. He was a real dyed-in-the-wool cracker, the kind that could send to wipe out the natives in Africa, make Central America safe for United Fruit Company, or run a sterilization center in Puerto Rico. Stanley Cohen came to see me. He was excited and upbeat. His good news was that he had found an investigator, an old friend of his who owed him a favor. His friend had contacts with the New Jersey State Police and thought they might be able to come up with some information on Harper, the police officer who was the main witness. He was also making progress in finding a forensic chemist. We both felt that at least some of the scientific reports had been fudged by the New Jersey State Troopers. We talked about this and a million things before the visit ended. He was so positive. He said he had a plan, something he wanted to check out, but he didn't want to discuss it and raise my hopes prematurely. That was the last time I saw Stanley Cohen. A few days later, I received a phone call. Stanley was dead. His body had been found in his home with evidence of trauma. Nobody, with the exception of the police and Stanley's family, knows to this day the cause of death. The newspaper stated Stanley died of natural causes, but a friend of Stanley's, a doctor, told me he had talked to the coroner's office and had been given conflicting stories. No one knows for sure how Stanley died, and we probably never will. The one thing we do know is that after his death, all the legal papers on my case came up missing. Evelyn talked to Phyllis, Stanley's widow, and she gave her every legal paper she could find that had something to do with my case, but the bulk of the material was still missing. Finally, Evelyn found out that the New York City police had my legal papers. How did they get them? I asked her. I don't even want to think about it, she answered. I could hardly believe all this was happening. It felt so strange. The New York police claimed they had taken my legal papers from Stanley's house as evidence. Evidence of what? I asked Evelyn. Apparently, my legal papers were the only property the New York Police Department had removed from his house. It took more than a month to get some of them back. Some were never recovered. None of the notes about the investigator or the forensic chemist were found. All the notes on trial strategy we had mapped out were missing. It was weird. I thought of Stanley's family and what they must have been going through. The circumstances of his death were so strange. I walked around with an empty feeling in my stomach for a long time. After Stanley's death, William Kunstler joined the defense team. The first thing the judge did after admitting Kunstler to the case was to rescind the order for state-paid experts, claiming the lawyers had failed to move fast enough to get them. I became more suspicious than before. I couldn't understand why Appleby of all of a sudden was so anxious we not have expert witnesses. It was obvious that without some financial help, I would never be able to afford expert witnesses. I didn't have a thin dime to my name. Appleby's strategy was to completely intimidate the lawyers, to harass them, threaten them until they became fearful of mounting any significant opposition to the legal lynching that was supposed to be my trial. Since there were no funds to pay for anything, the defense committees and the lawyers were forced to launch a fundraising campaign. The first time Bill Kunstler spoke in New Jersey, Appleby attempted to have him thrown off the case, charging him with improper conduct and conduct that was prejudicial to the administration of justice. The improper conduct was giving a lecture at Rutgers University during which he said that we needed money for expert witnesses, that the conditions of my confinement were detrimental to my aiding in my defense, and that under the law, I was presumed innocent until proven guilty. Appleby's order to show cause why Bill should not be thrown off the case accomplished what it intended. Instead of preparing for trial, the lawyers were first forced to spend time and energy preparing for the 2-day hearing that would determine whether or not Bill stayed on the case. Appleby finally decided Bill would remain, but only after we had spent a month dealing with that madness. The implication of the hearing was clear. Any attempt the lawyer made to defend me would be met with the judge's hostility. Appleby threatened every single one of the lawyers with contempt, not once or twice, but regularly. Lou Myers attended a fundraising cocktail party at which Angela Davis spoke. Someone sent a letter to the U.S. Treasury in Washington, and approximately 10 days later, he was under investigation by the Internal Revenue Service. Evelyn was repeatedly harassed by Appleby. Not one day went by when the so-called impartial judge failed to show his hostility to the defense team. The lawyers uncovered evidence that the offices across from the courthouse that they and the defense team were using were bugged. Motions for an investigation were denied. During a press conference, Lennox Hines had the courage to call the trial exactly what it was: a legal lynching in a kangaroo court. Appleby cited him for contempt, and an effort was made to disbar him. Only after he took his appeal to the highest court in New Jersey was he permitted to continue practicing as a lawyer in the state of New Jersey. The trial began on January 17, 1977, the same day Gary Gilmore was shot in Utah. Gary Gilmore was the first person legally executed since the death penalty was struck down by the U.S. Supreme Court in the early 1970s. His execution set the climate for the trial. The judge had denied almost every one of our motions, including my right to defend myself and act as co-counsel, a change of venue, a motion to review Harper's police record, a motion to introduce evidence that I had been victimized by the government's counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO, etc. Even though the National Jury Project had done a study of Middlesex County and had found that 83% of the people had heard about my case in the media and 70% had already formulated an opinion about my guilt, the court maintained that I could receive a fair trial. The judge said he would question the jurors and make sure they were fair and impartial. Appleby took pains to avoid asking potential jurors whether they thought I was guilty, electing to ask them instead whether they could put their opinions aside. He carefully avoided asking their opinions about me, the Black Liberation Army, the Black Panther Party, Black militants, or anything else that had been negatively biasedly reported in newspapers. The trial lawyers had no right to question jurors. Appleby's was designed to make sure the most hypocritical, opinionated jurors stayed on the jury. Here are two examples taken directly from the transcript. Question: and have you heard about this case? Answer: yes, I have. Question: from what source may you have heard about this case? Answer: newspapers. Question: have you discussed it with other people? Answer: occasionally. Question: and based upon whatever you may have heard from any source whatsoever, do you feel that you have already in your own mind formed an opinion as to the guilt or innocence of this defendant? Answer: well, to be perfectly honest, I think I would be a little biased. Question: let me ask you another question. In the event that you were to be chosen to serve, do you feel that you could sit and listen to all the evidence in the case and then judge it fairly and impartially and apply the law that the judge gives to you and put aside completely any previous opinions or conceptions or ideas about anything in the case? And then do you believe that you could render a fair verdict as to the guilt or innocence of this defendant? Answer: I think I could. Question: do you believe that you could? Answer: I think so. Example number 2. Question: do you feel that based upon whatever information you may have accumulated about the case from any source whatsoever, that you have already formed an opinion in your mind as to the guilt or innocence of this defendant? Answer: I would think that she was guilty. Yeah. Question: you feel that she's guilty? Answer: yes. Question: and let me ask you another question. In the event that you might be selected to serve as a juror in this case, do you feel that you could sit and listen to evidence and judge it impartially, apply the law to the judge gives you, set aside this opinion that you have already formed? Answer: yes, I probably could. Question: and then still judge impartially whether she's guilty or innocent? Answer: yeah, depending on the evidence and all that. These were typical of the answers given. The judge refused to remove the above 2 jurors for cause on the basis of bias that would prevent them from being fair and impartial jurors, and our premonitory challenges were quickly exhausted. Remaining on the final jury were 2 friends, 1 girlfriend, and 2 nephews of New Jersey state troopers. The so-called jury selection process was the biggest farce in legal history. About halfway through the so-called jury selection process, I was ready to call it a day. As bad as this jury sounded, it looked even worse. I didn't want to participate, but almost everyone on the defense team thought non-participating was a mistake. If you don't, we'll never get anything on record. You'll never even be able to convince an appeal court of anything. You got to get up there and tell your side of the story. We can prove by the medical testimony that you were shot in the back with your hand raised in the air. We can prove that Harper shot first. We can prove that after you were shot, your hand was paralyzed, and from the location of his gunshot wound, it would have been impossible for you to have shot him with your left hand. We can prove that Harper shot first. And we can prove this if you take the stand. We can prove. I was tired of this case. I damn sure didn't believe that any appeals court was going to free me or that any racist, white, prejudiced jury was either. It was obvious I didn't have one chance in a million of receiving any kind of justice. The financial problems, expert witness problems, personality problems among the lawyers, in addition to rotting away in solitary confinement, had taken their toll on me. Every day when I entered the courtroom, I felt like I was entering the theater of the absurd. I wanted no part of it. The lawyers said that I could create a political climate which they thought would force the appeal court to give in if I participated in the trial and put on the record that the fact that I was innocent. They were convinced that at the last minute, the forensic chemist they were trying to locate in Canada was going to come in and save the day. I didn't put any stock in that, but I knew that keeping the momentum going around what was happening was important. I decided to remain and participate even though it was killing me. The trial went absurdly on. An all-white jury was selected based on the advice of Kunstler and the jury project, who decided that even though the juries seated in the panel were horrible, the others were worse. Not only did the judge deny my motion to act as co-counsel, he refused to permit the lawyers to read my opening statement to the jury. The defense team's headquarters, located in New Brunswick, was broken into, papers rummaged through and stolen, and the judge refused to investigate, calling the motion frivolous. The state witnesses, almost all of whom were pigs, got up and said whatever they were told to say. We had no expert witnesses to refute or even evaluate their testimony. The main witness, Harper, the state trooper I was supposed to have shot, testified he had told an untruth on direct examination, but denied it was a lie. I spent most of the trial looking up at the ceiling and hating myself for sitting there in the first place. When the time came for me to testify, I was shocked. I had thought I would be able to go into everything, being a fugitive, how I became a fugitive, the entire political scenario that led to me being in the courtroom. But then they told me something about opening the door. Opening the door, it was explained, was like opening Pandora's box. If I gave the political reasons for my being a fugitive, the prosecutor could then introduce all kinds of prejudicial evidence that had nothing to do with what happened on the turnpike in order to show my criminal intent. If I opened the door, the prosecutor would be able to introduce manuals of guerrilla warfare and a whole stack of other material they found in the car that had nothing to do with this trial. In the absence of political witnesses whose subpoenas for their appearance, the judge had refused to issue, who would have testified about COINTELPRO's systemic attack on the Black liberation movement and on Blacks in general, my testimony would have been distorted. I wanted to back out completely, denounce the trial, but it was too late. The only way out was to testify, get my side of what happened on the record, and avoid opening the door. The year of solitary confinement had made me almost mute. As I testified, I held on to a small picture of my child. When I sit back today and examine why I participated in that trial, I think I must have been crazy. I guess I had been through too many trials and gotten too many acquittals and let that stuff go to my head. 3 other indictments have been dismissed. One in Queens State Supreme Court, charging me with killing policemen, was dismissed because the judge, after examining the grand jury minutes, determined there was not enough evidence for me to have been indicted. The other 2, one in Brooklyn Supreme Court and the other in Supreme Court in New York County, were dismissed for failure of the state to bring me to trial for 6 years after the indictment had been returned. Participating in the New Jersey trial was unprincipled and incorrect. By participating, I participated in my own oppression. I should have known better and not lent dignity or credence to the sham. In the long run, the people are our only appeal. The only ones who can free us are ourselves. And that's the end of chapter 18, and I'm going to go ahead and stop there. There is 1922. There's 3 more chapters left after this one, so probably tomorrow I'll have another late night reading space, and that'll be the end of reading this book. So I hope y'all have a great night, and of course I always end the space with, let's get free.